This week I'd like to talk about a really serious topic, and that is safety of women on the Camino. And I'm going to give you a guy's perspective. Now, before you say, I don't want a guy telling me how to keep myself safe, there's a big message here for the guys watching. That's really the reason I want to do this video. It's coming right up. Okay, so I'm kind of going to put myself out there as a bit of a guinea pig to maybe raise awareness, maybe get a bit of a discussion going. If you follow Eva's forum, you may recognise the thread of this sort of discussion because I put it up there, and it got a lot of good discussion going and some quite positive feedback. So I thought I'd share it here. And my aim here is not to try and tell women how to be safe on the Camino. How can I possibly know that? I don't see the world from a female perspective. I see it from a male world. But hopefully what this video will do is a couple of things. One, it will provide some thoughts for women watching this. Maybe it'll make you feel a little bit less hesitant about walking a Camino on your own. And I'll give you some resources where you can go and talk to other lone female pilgrims particularly. And also from the guy's perspective, because that's obviously my perspective, I want to share a few things really about, as a male, how your behaviours can impact the enjoyment of a lone female on the Camino. And some things that we might just take for granted day to day, but you've really got to think twice about. You know, it might seem insignificant to you, but guys watching this, I'd really like you to reflect maybe on some of your behaviour as well. So I can give the male perspective, certainly. So firstly, let's get the caveats out of the way. I'm a male pilgrim. I can't possibly put myself in the space of the female pilgrim. You know, I haven't had to spend my life trying to avoid dark alleys and, you know, keeping my keys ready and pretending to be on the phone at night when I'm walking alone. You know, women watching this, I understand that life can be very different for you, and I'm not going to even try and sort of go there and say that I even understand what you have to go through some of the time, but it's going to be a male perspective. So I'm going to be sharing that male perspective and a very personal perspective. Some of the guys watching this might get a bit annoyed. That's fine. Comment down below, male or female. Really the purpose of this video is just to get a little bit of thought and debate going. So if I draw a bit of criticism, that's fine, but I just want to get the topic out there for discussion. So just as a little bit of background, and really, you know, the goal of this is to, if I can create a bit of thought and help you make the Camino feel safer for those around you, you know, we'll have achieved something positive out of this video. But just a little bit of background. Those of you who've been on the channel will probably know a lot of this, but I'm married, I have a daughter, I have a niece living with me. I've walked Caminos alone as a male solo pilgrim. I have walked with my wife on Caminos. I've met plenty of solo female pilgrims on Caminos. Some of those I've walked with for a few hours off and on, some I've walked for days with off and on. And I've also interviewed solo female pilgrims, and I'll put a link particularly to an interview I did with Sarah Duma, just to get her perspective on what it's like for a female walking a Camino on their own. But I'm a guy, so what do I know? So I'm going to give the guy's perspective on all of this. So I certainly don't want to be causing any angst for lone females who are thinking of walking the Camino in the future, if you haven't walked one before. But I think as men walking the Camino, we have a certain responsibility to understand how our actions and behaviours can impact others around us. And I just want you to reflect on some of that. So, enough of the introduction. Let's talk about different aspects of the Camino and how you can perhaps be a little bit more considerate and a bit more thoughtful on your behaviour as a male. So particularly on the path, particularly on a remote path, I'll tell you how I sort of deal with this situation now and the mistakes I made in the past. So reflecting on my last Camino, the VDLP, quite remote, I did come across some lone female pilgrims walking that one. And what I would do is if I see a lone female walking up ahead of me, the first thing I make sure I do is I don't sort of cause any surprises. So I'll generally, I'm just looking down at some notes here to make sure I don't miss stuff, because this is really important. So firstly, as I'm coming up closer behind that person, I'll make a bit of noise so they can hear me coming. You know, I might cough a bit, or I'll clack my sticks a little bit, or, you know, sing or something, but I'll make some noise so I don't just appear suddenly. The other thing is, what I'll generally do on the path is that I'll cross to the other side. So if there's a woman ahead of me walking on the left-hand side of the path, I'm going to move across to the right-hand side of the path to create a little bit of personal distance between us. So again, so I'm not startling the person I'm walking up on. And, you know, we all understand body language, don't we? You know, it's like, be sensible, be sensitive. You know, as I'm coming up level to a woman walking on their own, I'll sort of glance across and say, Buen Camino, and you get a sense of whether people want to have a chit-chat or not. If it's, you know, fairly clear that they don't want to engage in conversation, I'll move on. You know, don't try and force things. You know, I've had situations where people will say hi and then we'll chat for a little bit and I'll move on. You know, I mean, everyone's different, but read the body language. Don't sort of impose yourself on people and try to force conversation and stuff. You know, if obviously preferring to be alone, move on, guys. You know, keep on going up the path. And I'll make a point of maybe speeding up a little bit, so I'll create some distance and then get back to my normal walking speed. So I mentioned I've done this wrong in the past, very wrong, I realise looking back on it. So on my very first Camino, it was in late April 2015, and something rather tragic happened on that Camino, and I won't go into the detail, you probably know about it, but an American pilgrim by the name of Tiem was actually murdered on the Camino, and I was walking the Camino Francis, I think about 3 weeks after she went missing, and we didn't know what had happened to her, and so everybody was a little bit jumpy, a little bit more conscious of personal safety, and I think it was coming out of, was it coming out of Carry On? I forget the precise location where she went missing, but it was obvious, you know, there was a certain section where she'd gone missing, and as we left that town, there was suddenly a greater police presence. People generally didn't really want to walk alone. Women particularly were buddying up to walk with others, and I can remember sort of walking on that section, and there was a woman walking on her own up front, and so I thought, I'll keep my distance. I don't want to sort of cause any angst or anything, but I'll keep my distance and keep an eye on her. Wrong thing to do, you know, quite clearly, because if she was glancing back and sort of saw me trailing behind, you know, I'm just looking like a stalker. You know, what would have been far better, I think, and for the women watching this, you know, do share your views, but what would have been far better is to adopt my normal approach now, where I sort of come up a little bit quicker, make a bit of noise, you know, like I'm here, hi, move on ahead, and then perhaps stay within sight, but up ahead, you know, that sort of thing. So do be aware of how just your proximity can cause angst for people. Let's move on then to thinking about, at the end of the day, after you're walking. And again, on the more remote Caminos, I make sure that I want to avoid being that creepy old guy. You know, I don't want to put anybody, make anybody uneasy or anything like that. So I wouldn't, if I can use that term, interrupt a lone female pilgrim in the accommodation or anything like that. You know, this just sounds like I'm walking on eggshells here, but I want to get this conversation going and get people thinking. So apologies if it sounds like I'm walking on eggshells, but I would generally not approach a lone female pilgrim, in a social setting, be it sitting in cafes, sitting around the albergue, unless it was part of a group. Again, you can come across as being a little bit creepy, I think, on those one-on-one situations if you're complete strangers. Let me flip that. There's a lovely albergue in Astorga called Refugio Guacamole, lovely Donativo albergue, where in the afternoons at about 4:30 they have afternoon tea in the garden, very British, and everyone gathers there. And you're all sitting around the table, so it's a very social setting, and there'll be a lot of people who are on their own, male and female, and you get to chit chat, and that's a much more comfortable setting, I think, for people to meet. I'm not going to impose myself one-on-one generally with a female pilgrim that I come across, because I don't want anything to be misinterpreted. I don't want them to be uncomfortable. Obviously, if we're the only two staying in an albergue or something, it's different. Read the room is, I guess, what I'm saying. If they're only two in an albergue, I've got to go out of my way even more to make sure that I'm not creating a situation where I'm going to make that person feel uneasy. We'll probably pick beds at opposite end of the dormitory or something like that. So I know for us guys it can seem like we're walking on a bit of a tightrope at times, but please just consider how your actions and your behaviours could be perceived. And I always think it's better to be a little bit overly cautious or safe rather than potentially cause anyone anxiety. So I'm talking about, on first meeting people. I've met some fantastic lone female pilgrims on Caminos in the past, and we've gone on really well. We've chatted for hours, we've stayed in the same places. We might have walked for days, catching up with each other, and you get some wonderful friendships occurring on the Camino. But if I can use that term again, read the room, guys. Don't be overly sort of pushy in getting to know people. The other thing that I think we have to be really careful of is that most guys have this sort of hardwired natural protection mode. Just be aware of that. A lot of the time it's not wanted. So for any women watching this, do comment. There'll be people jumping on here commenting saying, I don't need protecting, So guys, just be aware of that it can come across, I think, as patronising at times. And what I'd say is it's more a case of being there for other pilgrims, male or female. Just kind of being there for people who, to look out for each other and, to be there in case there's sort of incidents or anything like that. It's not about protecting people. Okay, just be sensible. I certainly haven't seen myself any behaviour that I thought was untoward by male pilgrims, although there is one that I will mention. But it's a really important thing here for us guys. And that is, I'm going to be really blunt here, I'm sorry, but if you see men behaving inappropriately, and it does happen, if you see them behaving inappropriately, particularly in shared accommodation and things like that, call it out. I think we have a responsibility to do that. For some women, it can be very awkward in a situation like that to necessarily be confrontational and overly assertive, with somebody who's making them really uncomfortable. It's probably a heck of a lot easier for us to be able to call out another guy and just say, wind your neck in, buddy. That's not don't make a scene, but step in and be a good Camino friend to those around you, I guess is what I'm saying. So step up if you see behaviour that's not appropriate. And what are some of those inappropriate behaviours? And again, we have to be culturally sensitive here. I think it's not just about gender. There was a recent discussion online about, personal space and touching. And, personally, I'm not going to touch anybody that I don't know. But some cultures are very huggy. There was a lovely comment on Eva's forum. It was from an Asian lady who said, hugging just isn't a thing for us unless you're under 6 years old. I thought that was a lovely quote. My wife Pat is from Thailand. Hugging is not a thing in Thailand. I can remember the first time I hugged my mother-in-law, she kind of went, "Oh, what's going on?" I'm not sure I've ever hugged my father-in-law. He'd probably die of a heart attack. But even amongst siblings and things like that, hugging's just not a thing. It's it's all this. So be aware that if you're from a culture that's overly huggy and tactile, if I use that term, a lot of cultures aren't. So be aware of personal space, keeping your distance. Again, read the room, read the body language. Just be a little bit more sensitive to it. The occasion that I was going to talk about, where it's only once where I've seen some behaviour that concerned me a little bit, was on my very first Camino, and there was an older man walking with a younger female, and I forget the sort of exact story, but I don't think they had met up prior to the Camino. I think they were walking together, and he was being very controlling and assertive, and it became obvious that she was a bit uncomfortable. And I can remember I was sitting with some Camino buddies one evening, male and female, and somebody remarked on it, and then suddenly, well, "Oh, you mean that guy from X country? Yeah, that kind of looks a bit weird. What's going on there?" And one of the older women in the group said, "I'll talk to that younger female pilgrim and see if she's okay," which was good. It's not overly interfering, but people were concerned. The relationship looked a bit strange, and again, it's like being a good buddy on Camino. And as it transpired, she wasn't very happy with the way things were, this younger pilgrim, and I think they parted company. But it was nice that another female pilgrim, a bit older, had sort of stepped in to have a chat and see if she was okay. Okay, so what else do we want to talk about? Do please comment down below whether you're male, female, whatever. I'd love to get your perspective on things. If you disagree with anything I'm saying, that's fine. Disagree. Let's have a little bit of a debate. If you want to talk about any awkward incidents that you've had on Camino, feel free. You may not want to. A couple of last things I'm going to mention about guys. So I've mentioned, if you see bad behaviour, call it out, guys. Let's look after everybody out there on the Camino. A couple of things that I was going to say guys take for granted. I don't, but some might. If you're out on the trail and you've got to have a pee somewhere, be discreet. You don't want to look like a darn flasher sitting behind a tree or something. People may see you. The path could be clear, but when you're having a pee or whatever, somebody might be walking up the path. Be discreet. The other thing is modesty in shared accommodation in the albergues. Most people I've come across are very modest. There's no nudity. I've only recently started staying in albergues myself, and I was quite pleased to see how safe it felt, in the shared accommodation. But I still do hear stories of guys walking around buck naked to the showers and thinking, what are you thinking of? I have to say I've never seen that. I've only heard of it sort of once or twice. But if you're that guy, check yourself out, mate. Think about your behaviour. And again, if you're another guy, call it out, cover up, you idiot. I know in some cultures that's probably quite acceptable, but you're in a mix of cultures. You're in mixed gendered accommodation usually. Be sensitive. Think about your actions. I guess that's what this video is all about. Be considerate. Think about how your actions might make others feel uncomfortable. There we go. I've probably rabbited on enough. So I hope this video is taken in the spirit that it's meant. I'm kind of just putting the topic out there. It is purely a male perspective. Just really for guys to think a little bit more about how your behaviour could impact particularly lone pilgrims around you and how you might be making them uncomfortable without even realising. That's a key message. Second one is, guys, if you see bad behaviour with other guys, call it out. And lastly, for women who are thinking of maybe walking a Camino on their own, are a little bit nervous about it all, do check out Facebook groups. I think there's a group called Camigas, which is for women walking on their own on the Camino. Jump onto Evar's forum. I'll put a couple of links down below. There's loads and loads of women there who walk on their own. You can reach out to them with direct messages and things and ask questions and get advice, but there's frequently discussions about the topic. You know, there are people who you can talk to get a little bit of reassurance about what it's really like. Is the Camino safe? It's safe as anywhere, I think. Safer than a lot of places. So there, that's probably enough waffle for me. Share your thoughts down below. Sorry, there's a couple more things that I meant to mention which are really important, and this is a couple of tips for women particularly who might be planning their very first Camino on their own. Again, difficult topic, but sexual assaults do happen, and what I mean by things like, you know, flashes and stuff like that, it does happen like everywhere else in the world, sadly. Hopefully, you know, you're not going to experience anything like that. If you do, any sort of behaviour that is unsettling, illegal, anything like that, report it. Please do report it. You will find the hosts of your accommodation, the hospitaleras, the hospitaleros, very good first port of call if somebody has done something, you know, that really needs to be reported. Talk to them first. A really good thing to have on your phone is Alert Cops. Do download the Alert Cops app. It goes directly through, I'm talking about in Spain now, it goes directly through to the police. It's a very easy to use app. And the Spanish police, the Guardia Civil particularly, the National Civil Guard, take this kind of stuff very, very seriously. So you will get you know, good response from the Guardia Civil if you report stuff. They're very sympathetic. They do take it very seriously. I know it can be a horrendous thing to experience. Well, I don't know. I'm a male. Here I go again. It's an experience that often goes unreported, and I can understand that to a degree. You want to move on with your life, move on with your Camino. If you feel up to reporting these things properly with the authorities and things like that, please do, because we've got to stop any sort of behaviour like this on the Camino. It's not appropriate anywhere in life, but you know, for women walking on their own on the Camino, it's even more horrible. And the more we can do to get perpetrators dealt with by the law, the better. So do report stuff if you're able. Do report stuff to the police. They're very receptive if you can. And you know, take care out there. And let's all look out for each other. Thanks for watching.